We get started. Who gets to start this? Is it Miles or Tara or? Oh, you. All right, I missed that.
Well, there isn't anyone else here around that was working on this when it started.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Is it okay if I sit back here, or you want me to go up front?
Oh,
You're fine right
Yeah.
where you are.
So what we're
no, I
talking
kinda
about
like
is a minority participation ordinance on our construction contracts. So those contracts over $50,000, all of our large construction projects. So I'll have Frank Samuelson come up in a minute. Frank, you don't need to come up yet. I'll give a little background, then Frank can come up. He can tell you a little bit about the history too, but this work started under Thomas. If you remember Ryan Berger, he had the lead on it for a while. Then it kind of fizzled away after Thomas left. NAACP approached me probably in 2017 sometime and said, what's the status of this? So there's a couple of communities in the state that have an ordinance like this, and basically this is ensuring that contractors look at minority businesses anytime they're looking for subcontractors. So the two ones that were pointed out to us were Peoria and Decatur. Decatur had the first one, and then Peoria copied it and has followed up on that. So we had lengthy conversations. I don't know if Mike Bartels was in it or not. I know some other public folks were in on the conversations. Dave Morrison was in on the conversations. And we talked to them about their ordinances and how they worked. And then we got a draft ordinance, and we put something together for us here. One of the issues we had was what was in some of the other ordinances were goals and targets, maybe 20% participation, 25% participation. And we were uncomfortable putting that in ours without having an actual number. In other words, if you say you need 25% participation and there aren't that many contractors out there, it's an unrealistic goal, and why do you have it in there? So we decided at that point to move forward with the ordinance as is written. This is the same one that the council saw almost 2 years ago. And it does not have any goals in it. And as we presented this to council during a study session in January of 2018, there was a lot of discussion. It was decided, why don't we do a survey? Why don't we put this on hold? We'll do a survey and decide if we can actually identify how many minority contractors there are out there, so we can put some realistic goals on here. So we worked with Augustana. We're doing some work with a number of their classes. They were going to handle this issue. It got delayed a little bit because they were switching over to the semester, so a number of their classes were canceled or put off till the following year as they sort of wrapped up the quarter system and then got ready to move to the semester system. So when they finally got together, they started looking at the issue. We sent out a press release, put on our website, looking for minority contractors in the area to sign up on our list. We contacted Chamber, Q2030, Women in Construction, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, NAACP, and a number of other organizations, everyone we could think of that would have some kind of contact with any kind of minority contractors in the area, and basically didn't receive anything. I think D-Films and one other one, I don't remember, Phoenix is the other one, and Phoenix is registered with the state already, so. And Phoenix we already do work with, not as a subcontractor, but as a general contractor. They do a lot of our stormwater work. Anyway, at that point, Frank Samuelson with the NAACP and I, we attended the briefings at Augustana, and after the last meeting, I said, why don't we just proceed with the ordinance that we had a couple years ago? Let's get it on the books, let's get it started, and then we can look to enhance it after that. And so that's why they're here. So if Frank could come up and maybe give a little history too of why they brought this forward at the beginning and kind of their thoughts on this. And then I did get some thoughts from Brian Tyson too that I can go over. I don't know if Frank's going to cover it or not, but anyway.
You want me to mention what Brian?
You can, yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. Well, as you heard, the committee, minority hiring committee of the NAACP has been working on this for several years, more, 3 or 4, I think. And it got, as you said, got put off. And then when you came to do the study at Augustana, we were told it was to be a disparity study to get some data to prove that minorities were not being hired and were not working on projects, in order to include some specific goals or some, apparently the legal team says that this is a requirement. And so that was our understanding, that was to be the goal of this disparity study. But when it was actually done, it was focused only on the minority subcontractors. And so that's what your ordinance now is proposing. And I speak for myself and also for Brian Tyson, who's a member of that hiring committee. And I guess we feel that this is a good first step, but it's just a beginning on what needs to be done and how this needs to be handled by the city. And Brian's point, and I agree with him, is that there needs to be some kind of consequences spelled out in the ordinance for if the bidders do not comply. So there needs to be some teeth in, and I have a couple of comments or suggestions to add to the wording in the. If you want to, are you going to put it on the screen? Can you do that? Yep. Okay, under part in definitions, part B. Part B defines the minority business enterprise, and I would like to suggest a additional sentence or so in that paragraph to the effect that the minority business ownership must be separate from the general contractors, because what we've heard is that sometimes a general contractor will designate his wife as the women-owned contractor for the trucking or something part of the business, and it's really within the family. And so that the minority business, minority contractors should not be connected with the general contractor in a family relationship. I don't know how you put that in legal terms, but that's the intention. Mm-hmm. I would also suggest that under D, the evidence of good faith efforts, under B, outreach, recruiting efforts, and so on, I would say including advertising in the local media and with the local Chamber of Commerce, including minority chambers of commerce that exist, and also that adequate time, adequate notice be given so that they have time to respond to it, because we've had examples where contractors would advertise for minority businesses or just other subcontractors, and they'd put it in the Peoria paper, and that would be it. And they feel that would, fulfill their responsibilities. But I think certainly the contractors should publicize their opportunities for for subcontractors in the local community. So our newspapers and our Chamber of Commerce, and especially the minority, Hispanic Chamber and so on, that they be specifically mentioned in their ordinance. So those would be my comments on your ordinance as it's proposed. I would also like to propose an additional, what I call it a resolution. It might end up being an ordinance, but I put it in the form of a resolution to express the concern that I have. And you may decide that it's handled in, in a different way in terms of an ordinance, but I'll wait till that's passed around. So it's very brief. I'll just, read it. Whereas it is the policy of the City of Rock Island to work toward a diverse workforce that reflects the diversity of the population of the city and the Quad City area. And whereas the population of the City of Rock Island is 39.5% people of color, including 20.3% African American, according to the United States Census in 2019. And whereas most local observers agree that our workforce includes far less than 40% people of color, especially in the construction industries whose projects are primarily funded by public, that is, taxpayer dollars through federal and city funding. And whereas the City of Rock Island seeks to act to correct this disparity in workforce diversity in the construction projects for which it contracts, therefore be it resolved that beginning in January of 2020, contractors bidding on publicly funded projects will be required to provide the City of Rock Island information on the workforce diversity, minorities, and women on projects that they have completed in the past 2 years, and on the minority and women-owned subcontractors they may have used on these projects. This data should have been gathered by contractors in order to meet the diversity requirements that are called for in all federally funded projects. And most of your street projects and so on have federally funded, or at least some partially federally funded, and so they should be meeting these federal requirements anyway and should have that information. Contractors shall also report the policies that they have in place or plan to adopt to increase workforce diversity on their projects and how they plan to achieve those goals. So be it further resolved that beginning in 2020, I wrote this a couple months ago, so that may not be a realistic goal at this time, but beginning whenever this could come in force, this diversity data shall be provided to the city in a timely manner, periodic way on all future projects publicly funded projects, and that this data be made accessible to the public, to NAACP or whoever would want to monitor that. And the purpose of this proposal is to provide over time to actually provide the kind of information that was sought by the disparity study, that we want to know, we want statistics that show, which we think will show, that there is very little workforce diversity in construction projects in the city. And if we're wrong, that's fine. We'll accept that data. but we're asking the contractors to provide that themselves and make that a requirement for bidding and being awarded the contract. So that's my suggestion, and you can consider that as in addition to your ordinance that you're talking, or they're proposing to. You any questions for me, or?
I have a question. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
I think so.
I have one question. In the third whereas, I'll read it as, and whereas many local observers agree that our workforce includes less than 40% people of color, do you have a good estimate of what the percentage is?
No. No, it's just that, you know, most people would say just from their observation, that we're nowhere near that.
And is that figure for the whole Quad City area, or just the Illinois side, or just Rock Island?
I'm only concerned with Illinois at this point. I don't know about Iowa. We're concerned about Rock Island County, or first of all, but we're addressing this to the city of Rock Island. We'd like to take some similar kind of proposal to other cities in Illinois cities.
Thank you, Frank.
I got a question. Are these?
Thank you.
Yes.
Are these percentages based in Rock Island or Rock Island County?
39.5, including the 20%.
That's the city.
That's a city.
39.5 people of color. That includes African American, Hispanic, Asian,
That's fine.
Africa. But those are the statistics that the Census Bureau updates it annually. So those were the 2019 statistics according to the internet information from the Census Bureau.
I have a couple of comments because I've worked very closely with the NAACP on this initiative. So I think, like everyone has said here, that the proposed ordinance is a good first step, and we can go forward from here. We should look into the matter of the wife loophole and things like that. And as Frank just said, the outreach, recruitments, including in the local media, the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera. Also, another entity to partner here with is the HCCTP program, the Highway Career Construction Training Program in Blackhawk College. I sort of see this as two-pronged, right? We got to make sure that there is not active discrimination against hiring either a minority-owned contractor or hiring minority employees. And so that's where some of the teeth, if you will, is in here, or should be in here, saying that you must demonstrate through the subcontractor utilization statement and things like that, yep, exactly, that demonstrates that you have in fact reached out, include letters to them from subcontractors, et cetera. But then the other step in this process is, as a city, working to make sure that we are facilitating connecting our population, specifically our disadvantaged population, with employment opportunities, right? I see a great opportunity. I know the King Center is doing a needs assessment right now. Part of this should be, if there is, opportunities for getting connected with employment, let's be making sure that we are connecting our population with the HCCTP program, with the different opportunities that we have. Regarding the including the diversity of the workforce for the contractors, I know the city of Davenport requires that, and I had talked to you a little bit about that.
You did, and Augustana did a study on that. Unfortunately, so was a survey that went out through the Tri-City Building Trades to all of the trades in the area. And unfortunately, they only got 12 responses.
Yeah, that's
So,
dismal.
you know,
The state of, the state of Illinois is working on this issue a lot, I know. We just had Governor Pritzker sign the Illinois Works Jobs Program, which is very much in this area of making sure that with the new capital program rolling out from the state, that minorities have equal opportunity to participate in that, whether as a contractor or as an employee. So this, I mean, multiple people are looking at this issue, and I'm hoping that we can join in. But specifically, what I'm saying, I guess what I'm trying to say is that Davenport already requires that. I've seen the forms that it's Davenport's affirmative action program.
Yeah, and we're
or something
gonna
like
see
that.
what they do and make sure it isn't just a form that's done for a form, you know, we don't wanna do that, we wanna make sure we're making some progress here.
Right. Well, and what the NAACP is asking for is the data. You know, we want to see where we're at. You know, how many people of color are currently employed by these contractors, and if it's 0 or 1 employees out of a crew of 20, then you know that there's obviously, you know, we can't improve without knowing the baseline.
Right.
I guess.
Yep.
So that information would be helpful. I guess all that I would have to say is let's continue to work with our partners in the community that can connect people to these employment opportunities with the programs that we are starting in the city, like our needs assessment, and the proposal that staff has provided, I think is a good first step. Maybe tweak it a little bit with respect to the concerns given. But we will continue to improve it to make sure that all of the residents of Rock Island are given an opportunity to participate if they want in their taxpayer-funded infrastructure projects.
Hey, anybody else have any questions? Randy or?
So what we'll do then is we'll make some tweaks to this, send it back out to Frank and his group, and we'll then bring it back to council in you know, with a request to do an ordinance, so it'll still be in a rough just like this, and be able to review it one more time. And that'll be next month, and then with any luck, by February, we'll have this in place. The goal would be to have it in place for the construction season.
Very good.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Terry, you up next? Is that? That's you. Someone's got the clicker.
So a little background as Tara's getting ready to find the clicker here. We started our meetings with the local realtors, initially just looking at the business realtors. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, and a couple of aldermen were in on that.
Yes.
Alderwoman Swanson's on her way. She sat in on some of those, so we'll wait till she sits down and then get started. But, so I thought they were very good meetings, and I think we learned a lot.
So during your goal setting for 2019-2020, one of the goals that was set forth for the Community and Economic Development Department was to gather some information from our local realtor community to learn what the city can and can't control as far as commercial and residential real estate. And so we decided that it may be a more productive way to gather information in small groups, having conversations that will not only discuss any issues or perceptions or merits for the city of Rock Island, then having one large group where we may or may not get to speak to people, plus small groups hopefully will build stronger relationships and start a conversation that will continue. So that being said, we organized meetings with local real estate firms. You can see the firms we were able to meet with thus far. So both Illinois and Iowa-based companies here. Concerns shared. Overall, the market is changing in many ways, and so Rock Island is not the only city who is struggling with some of the issues that we asked about. One thing we heard over and over again is that Rock Island has more of a problem with perception, perhaps, than what the issues truly are. So either past troubles or just a void as far as information goes. Maybe we haven't done as much on bragging about ourselves as we could to get positive information out to the community. We asked whether it may be productive for the city to have conversations with building owners, especially in these commercial properties, as we're trying to attract tenants. If we asked them to make some updates to the building, that would then make the space more attractive to tenants. And we heard that speculative interior updates really don't make sense for the building owner because of the demand on properties and then the rent rate that's received, particularly in office properties. And that's not just in Rock Island, that is throughout the Quad Cities that they saw that. And a couple expressed that perhaps a larger concern is that some of our buildings, not only in Rock Island, but across the Quad Cities, may be beyond what a feasible return on investment would be for a rehab. So a more productive conversation may be the fate of the property in general, whether it should be assembled into a larger property to then be marketed, or if it should just be given a Viking burial, you know? We also asked a lot about the Watchtower Plaza site, of course, because that is of great interest to not only our council, but our residents. And one of the things we heard was that a retail development is changing just nationwide. Big boxes aren't expanding the way they once were. They are really taking a look at where they have stores strategically based on shipping and internet usage and all sorts of things. And so the traditionally pitched concept for the Watchtower site may not be feasible for us any longer. So they recommended that we do a little bit more thinking in trying to decide what services we're truly looking for, what could be a draw on that site, and where are we willing to give on our original intent for the property. So we got no answers on that, but a lot more information to consider. There was some positive information shared. There is a perceived property valuation differential between Illinois and Iowa, but we heard that in commercial properties, that's not true, really, unless you're on a high-demand corridor. And those rates are not as high as people would think. That's what we heard. They felt like both states are valued fairly equally. And similar issues exist across the Quad Cities area, not just in Rock Island. We would love to have more traffic downtown, but the realtors said that they hear that from others as well. So again, a perception that we feel maybe like things aren't moving as fast as we want, but there are others who feel that same way about their hometowns. And then gathering background information on sites. Oops, sorry, I skipped one ahead. And we see vacancy or empty buildings. One of the realtors specifically was adamant that the market has been pretty tight. It's hard to find what people are looking for. So, again, perception. We're not realtors, and that's what we see versus what they see. Potential action items that were taken away. The City of Rock Island can be proactive in talking about our town and countering some of those negative perceptions. What are we really great at? What kind of businesses would we be a good fit for? What kind of people love living here? They said sharing stories from people who've had successful developments or successful projects would be one way to have a peer talk about what was good about Rock Island versus me, who works for the City of Rock Island, or you, who have been elected to represent the City of Rock Island, speak about what is good here. We can also work to build stronger relationships with our real estate community, sharing updated incentive information, sharing updated site inventories, sharing leads on potential projects. Of course, they eat what they shoot. So we're working to build those relationships and figure out exactly what type of communication is most appropriate and most helpful. But then gathering information, background information on the sites. So if we have a 5-acre property we should know what the utilities capacity is, what the electrical capacity is, what it would take to build a building. Is the soil suitable for building? Those sorts of things. The realtors saw those as appropriate expenditures that would hopefully bring some good return on investment to us. So that's just a brief overview of what we talked about.
I have a question, if I might.
Yes.
Some of the things that seem to be happening a lot in the Quad Cities area, both on both sides of the river, seem to be things like hotels, large entertainment venues, large sports venues. Was there any discussion about that at all?
There was. One of the things they encouraged us to think about, and we discussed with them, was that we want to bring something to Rock Island that is something to come to Rock Island for. We don't want to duplicate an effort. So we have Jumers. Other communities have their own casinos as well. The Betplex is great, but there are other baseball facilities around the Quad Cities too. You know, how would we set ourselves apart and make it a destination that would drive not only traffic to that site, but to surrounding amenities? So we did talk about that at length.
Real quick, the Visit Quad Cities just got done with the study. Huddle Group did a in-depth study in the Quad Cities and looked at, obviously, sports and trying, what would it take to draw some of these large, I'll call it little leagues and whatever, the baseball, basketballs, bowling, whatever it is. And interesting enough, the Quad Cities had a lot of, we'll call it at this point, ball diamonds, but a lot of these groups don't like to have multiple sites when they bring their tournaments to town. They like to have them all in one site if they can. So when you're bidding on it, and I didn't realize the type of bidding that they do with these things, they actually sit in a room and you bid. There's different cities bidding on, and I don't know the acronyms of some of these leagues and everything else, but they sit and bid on them. And so, and believe it or not, they bid on, in this case, women's sports more than even men's sports. There's more dollar value in tourism in the women's sports than there is the men's. But Betplex, or Betplex, and John DeDonker would have my head, the TBK Sports Complex, even that is not large enough for a lot of these to have it. We still get some of them, but to even have. So that was an interesting thing. Because some people talked about, let's put ball diamonds down there, or soccer, or whatever. And you can get some traffic, but it's not going to really draw large tourism because it's not large enough, and it would be fragmented amongst other venues. So once again, I digressed a little bit there, but the issue is, but is there some other, if it's sports or activity deal? You know, once again, there's different, if you want to call them icons. Bettendorf's got the Betplex type deal. Davenport's got, we'll call it the Ball Diamond. Moline's got the Tax Slayer. So what could Rock Island put there is a thought that came out. What could Rock, that's different than the others? Not a Me Too, not a, just because it's popular right now. What could they do? What could be there? Doesn't have to be sports. It could be entertainment. It could be whatever. And of course, no conclusion was brought to what that is, but to look at that avenue, maybe instead of retail. Another thing that came up a couple times was housing, and whether that be senior housing. It was not individual private homes. It was more of a little more dense than that. Call it progressive, you know, from age 55 to 65, 65 to whatever, to, you know, whatever. But that was another suggestion of some type of housing, maybe with a sprinkle of a little bit of retail with it on the outskirts of it. But so those two things were tossed out there as potentials. If that adds any clarity to your question.
Thank you.
Mike, can I,
Okay, sorry.
go ahead, Randy.
Just one thing to comment on a couple of new developments. You're probably thinking about TBK Center and Rust Belt. Those were built with private dollars and pretty much one investor on each of those that just had a wad of cash they wanted to spend in a certain area. So we need that person to come to Rock Island and spend a wad of cash. I mean, that's really what those took, right? Those were not investments by the municipality or the county or the state. Those were private individuals that came in and had some vision and were willing to put down a bunch of money.
Because one individual, you know, put 24 million of his own money in, and the other one put 50 million of his own money in. And so it was, you know, to get those to happen, it took those type of investors to take that risk.
Can I interject here a little bit?
Yes.
So going back to the sports theme of things, and I'm only speaking to this on my own personal level because I was involved in ASA softball for several years. I actually organized tournaments for girls softball for many years. I put them on, and so we talk about one site as a location. I know several tournaments, we would have upwards of 80 to 100 teams, and I would have to use Northeast, and I would have to use Green Valley, and they were both full all the time, and that was one tournament. So there is that opportunity to, I'm just saying, if you were to go that route, combined with, say, the Hitman Complex out in Southwest, and, there's some other, so there is opportunities there. My other thought, when it comes to and I think everyone's onto something here, because I really do believe that the sports, bringing these teams in here, which brings in a lot of people to the restaurants, to the hotels, soccer, but I think probably ASA softball is probably the biggest draw for bringing teams in from an outside area. Another possibility, I don't know if this, and again, it's finding that person to do it, would be to put an indoor complex as far as to hosting tournaments. I mean, for all the teams that we have on this side of the river, I mean, people travel to Peoria, they travel to, Wisconsin, these are things that go year round, where these teams come in the winter and they play. So there's some, maybe we're onto something different than we're looking at something else as far as, obviously the big box type of retailer is maybe not that right fit. But I do agree that maybe we're onto something here with the sports thing, because those do bring in a lot of teams from out of the area on a routine basis. They do fill up restaurants, they do fill up hotels. So maybe it's
Yeah,
another
trying to
market.
find a private investor.
It is. I'm
the
just
issue,
saying,
is
though,
the trick.
I like what you guys are talking about there, but there are opportunities, even from a softball standpoint, to expand in our city somewhere for some other diamonds. I know we have some available in some different areas, but those could be expanded upon. And as far as I know, we don't host any soccer tournaments in our city anywhere. So there's some things that I think we can start looking into that will bring some teams in, and those are some possibilities to create some revenue, so.
That's correct.
Well,
Yes.
one of the things that I thought was very interesting in those meetings was our storefronts downtown, and how we can better market those. And I thought some very good ideas came from those, and something that CED can certainly present to us at a different session. But some very good ideas were presented, and I think that the properties are there.
Yeah, they did mention with that, because we talked about the affordability can you afford to renovate them and charge the rent? And so, of course, we talked about historic tax credits and some of those type of things. And what came back we unfortunately got these we'll call it medium-sized buildings, and it doesn't pay. The cost to do a historic tax credits and everything else, you need a large enough project to make it worthwhile. It's the same cost if you do a real small project or a large one. And so that's where they started saying to do that, make it feasible, you need to assemble a number of properties. But yet, when we talk about assembling them, the buildings are too large for a lot of businesses to locate down here. So, because nobody's going to rent 3,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet. They're more looking at, 800 square feet or 1,000 square feet. And so you need to, it was kind of enlarge it to do a large project, but yet in that large project, dividing the buildings into smaller chunks to rented, if that makes any sense. So that was a recommendation that they talked about, if you could do that. Because we got the odd size, if you want to call it that, of some of the buildings. Randy, did you want to?
Yeah, and one thing we were looking at was, we've often talked, and it was mentioned briefly, on our office space downtown. And because if you have the office space filled, then you have people that want to eat lunch. That drives businesses downtown both to eat and to shop. And it really isn't the people living there that drive that, it's the people working there. And we don't have any Class A office space, so we asked about that. And basically what they said, and Tara hit on it, was that they have Class A office space in Davenport they can't rent, and the rent 15 years ago is less than it was now per square foot. And so to try to rehab some of ours into Class A office space. It just is not feasible. You know, years ago, everyone wanted their own office. Now it's an open concept with cubicles. And a lot of the companies, what they want is a business park where they go in, it's a bunch of offices, they're kind of secure in their own little area, and they have new construction. It's very difficult to bring someone downtown, and there's a glut of it in the area right now. So what you're doing is trying to lure someone from somewhere else or bringing someone new into the area. But, you know, we've often, Mayor and I have had many conversations about how do we fill all these empty offices downtown, and, you know, it sounds like it may not be possible to fill a lot of that.
It's kind of like retail. It's getting tougher to.
Just a different market now than it used to be, and,
Yeah. The information really confirmed that it's best for us to stay focused on right-sized solutions, the fit that's really the best for Rock Island, because we will expend energy and time getting folks to come do business with us, and we need to make sure they're a good fit so that they stay around for the long haul.
Like Tara mentioned up there is another thing that we don't have a good enough database on what we have, not what, when I say we have, what's available in the city. It's not what cities own products are. Is that if we're marketing or helping market a piece of property in Southwest Rock Island, even though we don't own it, do we know what the soil conditions are? Do we know what electricity is available there? Do we know what sewer and water takes? And that at this point, in a lot of cases, the owners of that land and or the buildings are making that investment, so the city would need to make those investments to gather that data and have it in their a toolbox, so to speak. And so that's where something I think that we're going to have to do relatively soon is work hard at, especially downtown. But what kind of spaces are there? What's in them? I mean, what's the rent going for? What kind of square footage? Do they need to be renovated? Talk about our building inspectors. What kind of things need to be brought up? So we have in our database. So if somebody calls and says, "Do you have this?" and it may not be the city has it, but we have it available in the city, that we have that, almost play realtor with a multiple listing, because some of these things, multiple listings don't have that information and or they're not listed. Some of these owners take a look at it and they're saying, I'm better off sitting on it vacant because I can't afford to renovate it. I can't get that kind of rent. So I'll just sit on it. And that's what they do. So there's some of that out there. So we found out some good information. I got to say that, once again, all the realtors were very, very open and talkative. They appreciated the conversation, the candidacy, and want to continue the conversation. They learned things about Rock Island in some cases that they didn't know either. We did talk about facade programs and TIFs and, different rebates and that sort of thing. So we were also able to educate them on the city of Rock Island. But is there other questions? Yeah.
No, I think it went very, very well. I mean, they were very open to working with us and partnering with us and helping to generate ideas. So I think it was positive, and like, the mayor said, they would like to continue the conversation, and I think that's great.
I think the Rock Island Country Market is a good example of where the city invested a little bit of money, and now all of a sudden the private sector is interested in doing something with it, right? So as we are talking about having the city invest in figuring out our inventory, we can point to the country market and say, look what happens when we put a little bit of effort and money into this, we get something back. A few questions. Did they hit on, like, feasibility studies? I'm thinking of, like, the Argus building, some of these larger vacant buildings. Was any discussion brought up about the usefulness of having a feasibility study performed so that then we could go to a developer and say, boom, we already got this, you want to do it or not?
They did not speak specifically to feasibility studies, but they did talk about maybe looking into possibilities for property assembly after we've done kind of a needs study to see what our market, and I mean, we have some of this data, but it hasn't been put together in a large presentation. Right. So what are our market gaps? What are the needs? What kind of services are accessible to our residents and which kind of services are not accessible to our residents? Then what type of properties do we have that are appropriate? Is there a way to assemble properties or to clear properties to make opportunities happen?
So I'm familiar with like a housing needs study. I believe a year ago or something, I was saying that we need to do one for downtown. Is there a needs study just sort of for a larger scope of not only housing, but economic development, you know, what, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for here, but a needs study for the commercial side of things?
You can do a plan for pretty much anything. I would say that it's most traditional for municipalities or chambers of commerce to hire a consultant to do something like this. I mean, we can cobble something together in-house, certainly, but,
Well, I would be interested in having a professionally done, no offense to our staff, but that's how this works, is that we have a professional assessment performed of what we have and what we're missing. Is that something that staff will potentially be recommending that we do to figure out where the gaps are and what we have?
So we're gonna look at it, whether we'll recommend it or not, I don't know, I mean, it is, one of the things to look at is what is our market missing and what is this market?
Right.
You know, we may think it's one thing and it's really another, and we're chasing after the wrong dream, and
You got to
how
right
do we
size it.
focus in the right area?
Yeah, I wish the council would have approved earlier this year that the individual and consultant to type be able to go out and do the inventory of the, what we have. Because we would have been farther down that road, because you can have all the consultants you want, but you got to know where your base point is.
Right.
You know, you can sit there saying, what do you need? But then you got to compare that to what do you have? And so we're a little behind where we should have been, my personal opinion, on that part of that data gathering. And so I would hope that the city council will look in the near future of approving that here in the near future, even if it's that separate, just all by itself, because it really can be handled by itself, approving something like that. You know, interesting, one or two of the people we talked to did recommend or thinking, well, once again, housing downtown. A couple said, no, it's where you're going to get a lot of your foot traffic is the businesses downtown, because they're there during the day. The other people that live downtown are working during the day and not here. But they do feel that, a couple of them did feel strong about that, but it being a market rate, is that they really felt that you need that disposable income and average income ability to continue to attract businesses down here. And so they encouraged more livable space downtown, but at market rate.
I think too, if we can get that discussion with all the realtors going, because I think they indicated, monthly or every other month. I think in that discussion, because a lot of them had ideas on what we needed. I think without hiring a consultant to do a feasibility or a needs study, you might end up getting that information just with the conversation of the realtors. Because bottom line is they know, they kind of know what we need and what we don't have.
right, and we can gather data. I mean, that's what we do.
Another way to put it is what we need is really more, they have a lot of knowledge of what's coming to town, whether it's in Rock Island or not. They say they can continue to educate us. These are what we're being asked for, and in some cases, they're willing to do it anywhere in the Quad Cities, but this is what we need. And some admitted that some people they talk to won't come to Illinois. They've had a few that wouldn't go to Iowa, but in some, of course, they say both. So
Well, I
there's a little
thought it
bit
was-
of all as far as the state border.
I thought it was interesting, that although perception of Rock Island was mentioned by one, there were others that said that perception of Rock Island is very good. So, I mean, I think that is a promising aspect that came out of this, that Rock Island is a safe place to work.
Regarding the Watchtower Plaza site, have we considered a design contest? Or was there any thought about that? I mean, the private sector is the sector that knows how to do it, right? And if a sports complex is the best way, if a sports complex is what we should do there with some outlots around it where you can have restaurants or whatever around it, within that density of that site, I mean, the private sector is going to be the side that can figure out how to make it happen. So is there any benefit to us saying, we're going to do a design contest with Bush and Russell and, you know, whoever, the developers around here come up with the best design layout for this site. I mean, is that something that was considered, or, I mean, a way to generate private interest, then, okay, if we put the building like this, then we could fit a sports complex and stuff around it. Or maybe they wouldn't say that put housing with commercial.
We have
around.
not considered that. We have considered, actually being more aggressive and listing it with somebody,
Yeah,
get them to market it. But we haven't considered design. I think for a design, they'd probably want to know what we wanted out of it.
well, don't they know what the market?
No, I don't, not the developers. No, I don't think so.
The builders are not gonna know as much as the real estate people may.
Get some partners with
Two
the real
different groups,
estate.
obviously.
If the builders knew the market, they'd build it. They'd come and build it right now, you
I
know.
suppose.
Well,
If
and
they
one
knew
of
they were
the
gonna make
things
money.
that we heard from the realtors was that as far as speculative buildings go, the type of building that they could most easily narrow down to say, this is absolutely marketable in the Quad Cities, is an industrial building with a certain ceiling height and a certain number of dock doors and a certain type of fire suppression, et cetera, which is great. But we're probably not gonna put that downtown, knock down some of our buildings to put that right downtown, you know?
Or on 11th Street.
Right, or on the Watchtower, it's not appropriate in that residential neighborhood.
Well, and I think too, the conversation drifted to that site isn't necessarily big enough for like a
Small.
sports complex. I mean, you couldn't put soccer fields there, you really couldn't put baseball diamonds there. So you'd have to kind of look at what sport would fit into a building there.
Or not sports at all. Just a high-density housing development, like you said, for senior care or whatever, and then some outlots with restaurant, commercial around it. But that's where a design contest might be able to get the private sector with like a cash prize, you know, like $10,000 or whatever, right? To stimulate, okay, at least we'll make 10 grand off this if we come up with the best idea. And then you have already the private sector swimming around thinking, okay, what would, you know, how could we fit this? How could we get the most bang out of our buck on this limited size property?
So I'd just comment that if we do a needs study, which sounds like we probably need to do, it's gonna cost money. And I wanna make sure that we utilize the study and act on it, and it doesn't wind up on a shelf collecting dust like a lot of other plans that past councils have done. And I'm not criticizing them, you know, they, for whatever reason, things didn't go forward. For example, the 11th Street plan, which we still need to pick that up and update it and execute the plan so we get something done.
Sure.
I don't know how much a needs study's gonna cost, I guess we'll find out. But I just wanna make sure it's worth the expense for us to go forward.
And remember that need study is downtown, and then could be a needs on 11th Street.
And
But yes.
Southwest Corridor, yeah.
So,
And some of the updates to plans that exist can be done through public engagement, you know, at a staff level or through some of our partners as well.
Yeah, and I think that's been something that I have really been frustrated about, is the number of plans that this city has had and that we have not, as a council, done a good job, not only this specific council, but just over the years, of making sure that we execute or follow up. And to that effect, I mean, we have been having some success in going back through some of the plans. I know Miles works on this a lot, of like our updates to the zoning code, updates to the comp plan, things like that, updates to the downtown plan. We had that study session a couple months ago now. I have been satisfied in making sure that we paid, I mean, we just had a conversation at like the last study session, I think it was, about the 1919 housing. 1918 government housing, about, well, we paid all this money 20 years ago for this thing, let's actually execute it now. So I think that Miles and the team are doing a really good job at going back and making sure, okay, we paid money for these plans, let's make sure we do them. And I would recommend, and like our city council goal-setting sessions, this is a bigger conversation, but our goal-setting sessions, we've all had the privilege of going through it once now, and it's sort of, just sort of free. I mean, there's some control, right? But it's really sort of, what do you want to do? I don't know, let's just do this. And perhaps, and I don't know how we could do this, but as we prepare for next year's, perhaps we could, like, frame it within the city's comp plan, which has a number of recommendations that have yet to be implemented. And instead of going off on the wild goose chase this way, we already have adopted a comprehensive plan for the city. Go through it and say, okay, is this still relevant? Is this something that we still care about now, 20 years later, or 10 years, 5 years later? And at least then that, as long as, if we start out with like, okay, here's where the plan has been, is this still relevant? Is there stuff we want to add? Is there stuff we want to remove? Not formally, like we do a formal update to the plan, but just sort of that guides our annual goal-setting session. We might have less of this sort of adopt a plan and forget about it thing. I don't know. It's just something that I've been thinking about, is how we can guide our annual goal-setting sessions as a council to keep more on track with our plans.
I believe, taking this even farther, I believe this format, we're gonna talk about the residential realtors also and do the same thing. And then, you know, I've been kind of pushing and supporting, sitting down with, especially, I'll say downtown, the building owners, not the business owners, but the building owners, and get their perspective on it. Once again, are they sitting on it, not doing anything with it because it's not cost effective? Should they sell it? Should we encourage or give them, have some programs for helping them sell their building, or, and getting out of that business? Or is there some incentive that we could put together next year's budget, let me say next year, 2021's budget or whatever, on what type of incentives maybe we need to offer that would help? Do we need to change the facade? Do we need to do some incentives for rent, or whatever it is? Who knows? But talk to the business, not the business owners, but the building owners, one-on-one, and get their perspective on the issues also. Any other questions, thoughts?
No,
Actions?
thank you.
Jim?
Thank you.
Thank you for the council members sitting in on those too, their input. All right, we have about 14 minutes.